Welcome back, and I hope you're enjoying Lecture Series 2. Again, I know it's really lengthy, but the good news is we're in the home stretch, and the next 3 lectures are quite a bit shorter than everything else that you've heard so far. What we need to talk about now are problems, sources, and symptoms. And I've alluded to these quite a bit in the previous lectures, but I want to talk about them specifically now and help you to understand how to identify them and what the differences are between them. So, when we're faced with what we think is a problem, when we're coming up against something that is prompting us to need more information and to conduct a marketing research project, we often need to begin by looking at that problem through some background research and really trying to identify whether or not we're actually looking at a real problem or if we're just in fact identifying a symptom of a problem, something deeper that's well below the surface of what we're identifying. And in fact, a lot of times we are first going to notice symptoms rather than problems. Symptoms are really painful, they get our attention, and often too they're pretty easily alleviated compared to problems. So they're kind of they're a lot easier to address and deal with because they often require a band-aid fix or a quick solution rather than going and doing a deep digging process of trying to understand what the root cause is. The problem is, or the mistake that we make when we address the symptoms is that we're not addressing the problem. And this can mean that we continually are in a state of alleviating symptoms, but we're not actually making the problem any better. In fact, we might be making it worse by letting it go on and on and on. And you know, I get into arguments with my wife all the time, for example, whenever I have a fever. You know, a couple times a year I'll get sick just because there's a virus going around or bacteria going around. And I have 2 small children, so it's very common for whatever's going around to come into my house. And my wife is a big believer in taking Tylenol or ibuprofen or whatever whenever she has a fever, and I am not. Her perspective is, I don't want to suffer, and that's a valid perspective. I'm not faulting her for that. My perspective is, I don't want to suffer, but I would rather suffer for a little bit than for a long time. My perspective is that if my body is having a fever, it's probably to fight something off, and that if I don't allow my body to have that immune response to fight off whatever's in the body, then it's going to get worse. I'm not going to get better, and in fact I'm going to just continue to treat my symptoms and find myself continuing to have fevers day in, day out until finally my body can fight off whatever's going on. Now, my wife's reaction actually is right if we have a viral infection, because viruses just have to run their course, and alleviating the symptoms is probably the best thing you can do. On the other hand, bacterial infections, you don't want them to run their course. You want your body to fight them off, and if you limit your body's ability to have an immune response, then you get yourself in trouble. And in fact, you can prolong the symptoms. Well, let's define what a symptom is, because we really need to understand this. So what is a symptom? A symptom is a change in the level of some key monitor that measures the achievement of an objective. That's what your textbook authors have to say. And it's a pretty good way to think about it. So a lot of times we have what we call metrics set up that we can look at and we can examine, and they can let us know if things are wrong. We can go through a process called dashboarding where we can understand you know, where our metrics should be, and if any of them move into the wrong area, we can be alerted to them very quickly. So, you know, metrics that might occur in our healthcare situation that I was just mentioning is you can take your temperature. So most human beings have a temperature of 98.6 degrees. Yours might vary a little bit. My wife's is always a little lower. Mine's usually 98.6. But you can take your temperature, and if your temperature is not 98.6, if it's 100.2, for example, then you can identify that there is a change in that key monitor, and that your temperature is higher than it should be, and therefore a symptom is occurring. You might also be able to measure things like your heartbeat or your pulse or your blood pressure or things like that to see if there's been some change that might indicate that there's some kind of catastrophe going on inside of you. So symptoms work the same way in business. You know, satisfaction could be something that could be symptomatic if satisfaction drops. Sales, you know, revenues, incomes, profits, all of those things can be used as metrics to look for symptoms. Unit sell-through, service usage, you know, turnaround time on projects, things like that. All of those things could be looked at. And ultimately, symptoms alert managers to problems. But symptoms themselves do not suggest or reveal what those problems might be. And that's an important distinction between a symptom and a problem, is that a symptom is pretty easily identified, it's pretty easily understood, and like I said, it can be painful, it can be something that you notice right away. But unless you have done the due diligence to understand how symptoms relate to deeper problems, and often you won't have that information on hand, then when you see a symptom, what you really need to start doing is saying, okay, we see that this symptom is occurring, but we need to go deeper. We need to figure out what's causing it, what's at the root of it. So how do we identify the cause of a symptom? Well, one thing that we can do that I alluded to in the last lecture is we can conduct a situational analysis to consider the possible causes of symptoms. Possible causes of symptoms. We can make a list. We can kind of brainstorm and come up with ideas about, what could be going on here to cause this symptom to be going awry. So if sales are down, we could start talking about, among ourselves, what are the conditions that are going on that might be resulting in sales going down? Is it that we have a competitor that's really getting aggressive in pricing towards us? Is it that we have a problem with our channel partners? Is it that we're having a problem with suppliers and we're not getting product out quickly enough? Things like that. Once we have those possible causes in mind, we can start to narrow the possible causes down into probable ones. So once we've brainstormed and made our list, we can start scratching things off that we know aren't true. For example, we might list seasonality as a possible cause, but then look at it and go, well, seasonality is only a problem for us during December. It's not really a problem for us any other time of the year. So we're going to scratch that one off the list. So we can begin to narrow things down. And once we have our probable causes, we can start drilling down on those with research and discussion and looking at all of our internal information. And we can determine what our most likely cause or causes might be. And that's where we can really begin to start thinking about what it is that we want to study. So generally speaking, your textbook authors talk about the fact that there are generally two sources for problems. There are other sources, but these are the two most common. The first that they mention is what they call failure to meet objectives, and that's very simply the difference between what was supposed to happen and what did happen. So in other words, we expected sales to be steady and all of a sudden they dropped and we don't know why. That was a failure to meet objectives. We expected to hit this revenue target this quarter and we were significantly below it, so it was a failure to meet objectives. That's a problem, or a source of a problem. The other, they call it opportunity. I always struggle with this one in explaining this to students. I'm going to call it a lost opportunity because that's really what they're talking about. They're talking about an opportunity that came and went and that we missed it. And that is the difference between what did happen and what could have happened. So we're going to call that a lost opportunity. Now, if you're being proactive with research, you can also identify an upcoming opportunity, which is the difference between what's going to happen and what will happen if we change our course. But we're talking about problems in a more reactive state in Chapter 3. So let's think about it as being a lost opportunity most of the time. Once we're able to identify our problem and we're able to kind of consider the source of it, is it a failure to meet objectives, is it a lost opportunity, then we have to get together and make a decision on how to solve that problem. And that's either going to come from a single manager or a team of managers, or maybe a manager with the input of their staff. Some person or group of people are going to have to make a decision at some point about how to deal with the problem. Unfortunately, we can't always just say, well, something's a symptom, therefore we have to ignore it. Sometimes we have to address the symptoms as well. So for symptoms, we can look for short-term alleviation of pain and suffering, and if we can do so without hurting ourselves or without causing ourselves significant amounts of trouble, it's not a bad idea to do that. Anytime you can alleviate a symptom, you should. But we have to remember that the symptom is going to return when the treatment wears off, and if our treatment is going to get in the way of solving our problem, we want to solve our problem more than we want to alleviate our symptom. Now for a problem, we have to look for longer term solutions, and we have to really focus on solving the problem itself and ignoring the symptoms. But the good news is that if we actually solve the problem, our symptoms will disappear once the problem's resolved. Now, I want to conclude this by just telling a quick additional personal story about myself that I think will put this all in perspective. a few years ago, in this very office where I'm sitting right now recording this video, I came into work with an awful stomach ache. Now, my stomach had been hurting all week, and I walked into my office thinking that it was right up here, right up in the top part of my abdominal cavity. There we go. And my stomach was hurting, and it was really my stomach. Your stomach is actually right up here, and I thought that I just had some bloating or gas or something that had built up, and so I suffered for about an hour, and then I walked over to the Target around the corner from my building and got myself some Gas X to try to relieve that bloating, and it just made things worse. And in fact, I was feeling more and more pain as the morning went on, and I couldn't get comfortable. I was sitting at my desk trying to work, and I eventually laid down on the floor and started rolling around, trying to find a way to get comfortable, waiting for this gas bubble that I thought I had to pass, and then I started throwing up. And it was about noon before my boss at the time walked into my office and said, "Well, Sean, are you going to go to the hospital, or do I need to drive you there?" So I still didn't think things were that bad. So I called my wife, and she came and got me and drove me to the doctor, which was on the other side of the river. I work in St. Louis and live in Illinois, so we had to drive all the way to Illinois. And I was in such bad shape driving that I continued vomiting, and I started passing out. Got to the doctor. I didn't get to see an actual doctor. I saw a physician's assistant, and the physician's assistant didn't know what was wrong with me, kept focusing on the fact that I said my stomach was hurting and tried to give me something to expunge what was in my stomach, and then tried to give me something to soothe my stomach, and both of those things just made me vomit. And I kept blacking out because I was in so much pain. And they finally said, "Well, there's nothing we can do for you. You have to go to the emergency room, and you need to go now. We have no idea what's wrong with you." So I went to the emergency room, and within about an hour, I was being seen by a doctor who pretty much ignored everything I had to say about how much pain my stomach was in, and how I thought I had a gas bubble and things were just getting worse. And what he did was he took 2 fingers and he jabbed me in the side, and he said, "Does that hurt?" And I felt a pain that I hadn't felt all day that was even worse than what was going on in my stomach. And I was like, ah. He said, "Yeah, the problem is that you have appendicitis, and your appendix is in the process of rupturing right now. And if we don't get you into surgery in the next few hours, this could be something that could be life-threatening." So they had to very quickly assess that I did have appendicitis by doing some scans, and then they got me into surgery, and then a few hours later, my ruptured appendix was being taken out of my body. And I was lucky, by the way, because a ruptured appendix actually can be a very serious injury. Mine had not ruptured to the point that it was life-threatening yet, but it was heading that way. And by the next morning, I woke up in a hospital bed with -1 appendix. Now, see, what's interesting about this story is that I was really focused on the symptoms. I kept thinking that my stomach was hurting. My stomach was not in the same part of my body as my appendix. I never even bothered to feel down there. Didn't even notice it because my stomach was hurting. What was actually happening was my appendix was sending distress signals into my body, and those manifest in the stomach. So it was sending signals that were supposed to be symptomatic to let me know something was wrong. But the problem was that I was so focused on those signals that I missed the fact that it was my appendix that actually needed to come out. And had I ignored it, not that I could have, I was in so much pain, but had I ignored it much longer, it could have potentially ended my life. So, not to be overly dramatic, but just to say, it's really important that we make sure that we understand the distinction between a problem and a symptom. Because in my case, the symptom of my stomach hurting was nothing compared to the problem of this appendicitis that I had, this rupturing appendix that I had in my body. But once that appendix came out, yeah, my stomach didn't feel that great for the next couple of days, but I was much better a few days later, and have never felt a pain like that since. So as you think about problems and symptoms, just understand problems are a lot more difficult to deal with, but they are a lot more productive to ultimately root out and make sure that they go away. The symptoms are easier to focus on, but man, if you focus on them too long and you miss those problems can really come back to get you.